here, look. Minister, you're very welcome. This really is quite a bizarre moment. We have a motion from Fine Gael which essentially spends an awful lot of its time congratulating themselves on the great job they've done on the cost of living, before going on then to declare the additional help that we need next January. Next January. It's June. There was a lady on the radio the other evening, national radio, a number of you may have heard her, called Tracy, and she came on to tell people how she'd been affected by the cost of living crisis, how she'd gone 3 to 4 weeks without buying shopping, how unexpected car repairs meant she wasn't able to buy food. The public transport system doesn't get her to where she needs to go, so she needs her car. She can't work because of a lack of affordable childcare, but also because she has health issues that would hinder her employment opportunities. So right now, she's relying on St Vincent de Paul, friends and families for help. And Fine Gael's message this evening is, no problem, we'll talk to you in January. We need a mini budget now. Sinn Féin have been calling it for months. And I just can't believe that on top of missing that call and congratulating yourselves on the wonderful job you're doing, you went out yesterday with this nonsense about a 30% tax rate. You've heard the figures from my colleague here already. Our health system is in crisis. My colleague, Senator Byrne in Limerick, knows well the crisis firsthand in University Hospital Limerick. Maybe my colleagues in Fine Gael would like to go down to the emergency department tomorrow and canvass their views for tax cuts as people languish on trolleys for 15 hours at a time. When we have almost 1 million people waiting on hospital waiting lists, and yet your priority, how you wanted to rebrand yourselves, is clearly, look at us, we're a tax-cutting party. Are you so out of touch with the crisis in our public services? If you don't want to go to University Hospital Limerick, I'd invite you to go in front of the Homeless Action Team's offices, where we have no emergency accommodation whatsoever, in the midst of the worst housing crisis in the history of the state, created by your party. Fine Gael talk about housing as if it's some kind of natural disaster. Isn't it awful? Why don't we pull on the green jersey and all try and help? It's not a natural disaster. It's a result of incredibly poor policies over the last decade, which have created this housing crisis. And your message this evening to the thousands of people on housing lists across the country is, we'll give you tax cuts. As if that's going to fix anything. I might invite you to come to my village in Castleconnell and talk to people paying €1,400 in rent each and every month. We have proposed a cut in their rent and a ban on rent increases to actually give people back money in their pockets, not next January, but now, because they are hurting now, because they cannot afford their bills right now, because the cost of diesel, already heading towards $2.20, apparently is going to be at $2.50 by the summer. And yet, before you go off on holidays, the message from Fine Gael is, there's no problem here, lads. We'll have a budget in October, and we'll look at it in January. And as an economist said to me yesterday, looking at the nonsense proposal in relation to the 30% tax rate, he described it as fiscal incontinence. And that's what it is. We have a fiscal window of $1.5 billion. Your proposal costs $1.7 billion. You want to be all things to all people. But the fact of the matter is, for 10 years you've failed on housing. For 10 years, you've failed on healthcare. And the evidence is there in our hospital wards, in the waiting trolleys in Limerick. We have the lowest amount of first-time buyers of houses in Dublin, down to 30%. You're failing in so many respects in terms of public services. And then you talk about hard choices, Minister. Hard choice? Really? So is the hard choice to introduce tax cuts for the already well-off, while we have people languishing and suffering each day? Are you that out of touch with what's happening in our country today? If we want to make hard choices, here's a suggestion. Why don't we start by scrapping the Special Assignee Relief Programme, which gives millions in taxpayers' money to millionaires, millionaire executives in our country? But clearly, that's a step too far. That's a hard choice that Fine Gael won't make. This is all about rebranding Fine Gael back to basics. They're our Irish Tory party, our Thatcherite party, who like to promise tax cuts while they abandon public services. The housing crisis is getting worse, month on month, year on year. Last week, the Minister for Housing couldn't even commit to reducing the number of homeless to under a figure of 10,000 by the end of the year. But not to worry. There'll be a budget, measures in January, and sure, tax cuts. I mean, seriously. People are at the end of their tethers. We had a housing meeting the other night, full to the rafters in Limerick. And the horror stories One man living basically in a space for furniture, one of those places where you put your furniture when you're between houses. That's where he was. And the emergency people have nowhere to send them. And you want to talk about tax cuts? You've had 10 years to sort out these problems. 10 years. It's no wonder that we've only had 6 minutes with Fianna Fáil and the Green Party are nowhere to be seen. I don't blame them. They're clearly embarrassed to be associated with this. And they know what's going on here. Let's rebrand the party as a tax-cutting party. At whose expense? At whose expense? You have failed this country in terms of housing, in terms of homelessness, in terms of healthcare, and in terms of basic fairness and justice. And you have the gall to come in and talk about tax cuts for the wealthy again. People have seen through this Fine Gael government. You're out of touch, and please God, soon you'll be out of time. Go on, Margaret.